Hey there, Sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the elementals, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical, seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up, let's begin. Long before the kingdoms of Oo were carved from the strange landscapes of a world reshaped by war. Long before the candy people laughed in their streets, or the fire kingdom roared with its eternal flames, there existed 4 presences. They were not kings or queens, nor soldiers or scholars. They were older than nations, older than wars, older even than most stories remembered in whispers. These were the elementals, guardians and manifestations of the world's deepest forces, each tied to an essence that shaped not just land and matter, but also the hearts of those who came after. Fire, ice, candy, and slime. Each one eternal, yet never the same. They lived not as immortals, but as cycles, reborn across ages and new forms, carrying echoes of the same soul. Just as a flame can leap from torch to torch, or water can freeze and melt and flow again, the elementals existed as eternal recurrences, appearing in bodies that bore their power until time called them into new vessels. Imagine, if you will, the earliest days of this world. The Mushroom War had not yet scarred the earth, though shadows of human ambition already stretched long. In that strange twilight between the world we know and the world Oo became, the elementals stirred. Fire burned within mountains and molten cores, searching for a vessel to give it voice. Ice slumbered in glaciers and frost, dreaming of a figure to carry its chill. Candy, surprisingly, began not as something small and playful, but as a radiant symbol of growth and sweetness in the natural world. And slime, ever fluid, crept in rivers and swamps, waiting to take a form that could speak, laugh, and dance. What makes the elementals remarkable is not simply their power, but their personalities. For they were not blank forces, not faceless embodiments of nature. Each time they returned, they carried a personality shaped by their essence. Fire was passionate, volatile, driven by strong motion. Ice was calm, distant, sometimes cold in heart as much as in body. Candy carried innocence, joy, and at times a naive sense of order that could be both comforting and dangerous. Slime was ever-shifting, free, unconcerned with rules, forever adapting. As we trace their stories, it becomes clear that these personalities were not random quirks. They were mirrors of what their elements meant to existence. Fire's role was to destroy but also to renew, clearing the old so the new might grow. Ice's stillness was preservation, holding things frozen so they would not fade away, though this came at the cost of loneliness. Candy was community, togetherness, the sweetness of life that makes survival feel worth it. And slime was the reminder that nothing can remain fixed forever. All things shift, change, dissolve, and reform. Legends tell us that the 4 were meant to be in balance, like corners of a great circle. When one grew too strong, another would rise to counter it, to steady the world from tipping too far in one direction. Fire could not consume endlessly because ice was there to still it. Candy could not spread without end because slime would seep in to remind it that nothing remained solid for long. Their cycle was not only one of reincarnation, but of constant correction, a rhythm that pulsed beneath the surface of Oo's history. And yet, even in their earliest myths, we see how fragile this balance could be. Because though the elementals were eternal, they were also deeply human. Their vessels, their incarnations, were not flawless beings. They carried desires, doubts, loves, and fears, Fire elementals could be overcome by rage, ice elementals by solitude. Candy could lose itself to control, slime to carelessness. The very traits that made them guardians of balance also tempted them into imbalance. That is why their story is not a simple tale of order holding the world together. It is a story of struggle, of cycles of harmony and disharmony, of times when the elementals lived peacefully in their roles, and times when they clashed, pulling the world into chaos. One of the most important truths of the elementals is that they are not distant gods. They are close to us, reflections of our own hearts. Each of us knows fire's anger and passion, ice's isolation, candy's sweetness, and slime's restlessness. The elementals remind us that balance is not something achieved once, but something we must practice, lose, and practice again. When we step back to consider their beginnings, one might ask, where did they truly come from? Were they born from the universe itself, like stars gathering gravity until they ignite? Or were they placed here as stewards by a greater force, perhaps even by GOLB or some other primordial power? Adventure Time leaves these questions open, but what it gives us is the undeniable truth that they have always been here, long before crowns or swords, long before dungeons and quests. The elementals are the pulse of the world itself, reshaping history in ways both grand and quiet. These first sparks were not seen by human eyes, nor written in books. They were woven quietly into the fabric of the world, waiting to be recognized. In the earliest days, there were whispers of figures who seemed too powerful, too strange, to be ordinary mortals. A woman whose touch could scorch fields yet bring warmth to frozen villages. A hermit whose gaze turned rivers into still glass, preserving fish beneath the ice for seasons to come. A child who could create sweetness from thin air, feeding starving wanderers with sugar that melted too quickly to be stored. A wanderer of mud and swamp who could slip through cracks, reforming wherever he wished, laughing at the limits that bound others. These were fragments of the elementals' earliest lives, shadows of their first vessels. We may never know their names or their full stories, but the echoes linger, preserved in the instincts of the later incarnations we do know. Flame Princess, Ice King, Princess Bubblegum, Slime Princess. Each of them carried not only their own choices, but also a lineage of forgotten lives behind their eyes. What is fascinating is how these cycles never seem to follow rules of bloodline or kingdom. The elementals were not inherited like crowns or passed through the family lines. They chose vessels, or perhaps were drawn to them, as if destiny selected those who matched their spirit. Fire sought passion and strength. Ice sought solitude and intellect. Candy sought builders of community. Slime sought those who refused to be contained. Sometimes the vessel was ready for the burden, and sometimes it broke under the weight. This raises an intriguing idea. Were the elementals always meant to maintain balance, or were they also meant to test the world, to stretch it to its limits? A raging fire elemental could destroy cities, but that destruction also forced life to grow back stronger. A withdrawn ice elemental could plunge people into suffering, but in that stillness some found new resilience. Candy's joyful creations could build unity, but also lead to complacency and blind trust. Slime's unpredictability could dissolve the stronger structures, but also make room for change. Balance was never simple harmony. It was a living tension, always moving, always unsettled. When we look at their place in the great design of Ooh, it feels almost as if they were meant to embody the four corners of existence itself. Fire represented energy and passion, the spark that drives all things forward. Ice was entropy, the cold that slows, preserves, and reminds us of endings. Candy was life's sweetness, the joy and innocence that makes struggle worthwhile. And slime was the chaotic cycle, the transformation that ensures nothing can ever stay fixed. Together they formed a wheel that turned endlessly, grinding down extremes and pushing the world back toward equilibrium. But like any wheel, there were times when it spun out of control. Ooh itself is littered with reminders of these conflicts. Glaciers that seem unnaturally vast, scorched fields still unable to regrow, forgotten ruins buried in sugar, swamps that stretch like oceans of green. These scars are the silent record of times when the elementals clashed, when the wheel wobbled and nearly collapsed. And yet the world survived. Perhaps that is their greatest gift. No matter how destructive they could be, the elementals always returned to the circle, always reincarnated, always began again. It is this endless renewal that makes them different from other forces in the Adventure Time universe. They are not like GOLB, who embodies chaos without balance, or like the Lich, who hungers only for death. The elementals are closer to nature itself. They may frighten, they may harm, but they always rebuild. Their story is not one of doom, but of cycles, like the seasons turning or the tide rising and falling. Think about the world as a great stage. On it, countless players act out their lives. Their kingdoms rise and fall. Their wars burn brightly and fade into memory. The elementals are not the kings or soldiers in this play. They are the stage itself, the background that sets the rhythm for every other tale. Without them, the play would collapse because fire, ice, sweetness, and transformation are not optional. They are the very fabric of existence. And if we lean in even closer, there is something almost comforting in that idea. Because it tells us that no matter how much ooh changes, no matter how far kingdoms rise or how deeply they fall, the elementals will always be there. They will be reborn in new forms, carrying echoes of old memories, learning old lessons in new ways. They remind us that balance is never lost forever. Even when the world seems broken, the wheel always turns back again. The question that has always fascinated scholars and storytellers in Ooh is whether the elementals were born with the world or if they were drawn into it later. Some ancient scrolls whisper that the universe itself is threaded with primal forces, and when Earth was still young, those forces found homes in living vessels. Others suggest that the elementals were not born of nature, but of need. That when balance faltered, the world itself created guardians to keep the chaos from consuming everything. Perhaps neither is entirely true, and perhaps both are. In the end, the mystery only deepens their power. Take a moment to picture them in their purest form. Fire not yet bound to a princess, stretching endlessly across a horizon, burning not to harm but to cleanse. Ice blanketing mountains in glittering silence, a breath that slows all things so that nothing is lost. Candy, more abstract than sugar or gumdrops, an aura of joy that binds beings together in laughter and comfort. Slime, pooling and rippling, neither solid nor liquid, but something in between, refusing to be contained. These were not kingdoms. They were not even individuals. They were states of being, waiting for vessels to channel them into shape. This is why, when the reincarnations finally appeared in recognizable figures, they felt so strange to the people of Ooh. Imagine seeing a young ruler whose every decision radiated fire's intensity, or a quiet wanderer whose sadness chilled the air around him. The elementals were human, and yet not. They carried echoes of something much older, something that made others sense both awe and unease in their presence. And their cycles of reincarnation were not gentle. Each new life began unaware of the burden, often stumbling into their role without understanding what they were. Flame Princess did not grow up knowing she was fire incarnate. Simon did not realize his descent into the Ice King was also the awakening of the ice elemental within him. Princess Bubblegum's genius and ambition were not simply her own traits, but echoes of Candy's eternal drive to bind life together. Slime Princess, though underestimated, carried within her the freedom and resilience that no other kingdom could quite tame. In each of them, the personality and power of the elementals awakened gradually, sometimes violently, shaping not only their destinies, but the fate of those around them. There is a beautiful symmetry in how their traits mirror the human experience. Fire teaches us about passion, but also warns of anger's cost. Ice shows us the strength of solitude, but also its heavy loneliness. Candy gives sweetness and community, but reminds us how easily comfort turns to control. Slime celebrates change, but also teaches us how unsettling it can be to lose the structures we cling to. It is as though the elementals were designed not just to keep Ua in balance, but to hold up a mirror to those who lived in it, teaching them what it means to be alive. Legends of the first great gatherings tell of times when the elementals met face to face, long before the stories we see in the show. They did not always speak in words. Sometimes their meeting was felt as a storm, when fire and ice collided in the sky. Sometimes it was seen in the earth itself when Candy's vines grew wild, only to be dissolved by the creeping reach of slime. These encounters became myths, told and retold, until later generations confused them with natural disasters. Few realized that what they witnessed was the great cycle at work, a cosmic conversation between four eternal beings. One particularly haunting myth describes a time when fire and ice warred so intensely that the sky itself cracked, spilling auroras across the world. The story claims that Candy, trying to mend the wounds, spread too far, creating unnatural growths that consumed entire valleys. And slime, ever opportunistic, seeped into the cracks and spread through the chaos, reshaping the land into swamps and wetlands that still exist. Whether or not this myth is literal, it reflects the truth that the elementals were not passive. Their conflicts shaped the geography of U itself, carving out valleys, freezing seas, and planting forests of candy-colored growth. And yet, their legacy is not only in destruction or creation. It is also in the subtle ways they wove themselves into the fabric of ordinary life. Every flicker of a candle, every icicle hanging from a roof, every sweet shared between friends, every puddle that shifts shape beneath a child's foot, these too are whispers of the elementals. They are not just grand forces of legend. They are the everyday magic that reminds U of its strange, enchanted nature. The deeper we peer into their origins, the more we begin to see them not as outsiders, but as the world itself, given personality. They are the fire in our hearts, the ice in our memories, the sweetness in our laughter, the slime in our change and resilience. They are not only guardians of cosmic balance, they are us. If we look closely at the patterns of the elementals' appearances, we notice something curious. They often return during times of transition, when the world is shifting, when kingdoms are crumbling, or when balance is threatened. It is as though their cycles are tied not only to the rhythm of nature, but to the struggles of history itself. U seems to summon them when it needs them most, or perhaps when it is most vulnerable to their influence. This is not to say they arrive as saviors. Sometimes they make things worse. A fire elemental could burn down as much as it protected. An ice elemental could freeze more than it preserved. Candy could smother with its sweetness, and slime could unravel structures until nothing stable remained. But whether they healed or harmed, their presence always marked a turning point. And when we look back across Oo's long history, the faint outlines of those turning points begin to shine through, like constellations in a night sky. What makes this even more fascinating is the way the elementals connect to one another. They are not isolated forces, each acting on their own. They are bound together in an invisible web. When one grows stronger, another responds. When fire blazes, ice thickens. When candy grows unchecked, slime begins to spread. This balance is not perfect harmony, but rather a constant push and pull, like tides against the shore. Sometimes the world sways gently between them, and other times it is thrown into storms when their struggles grow too fierce. In one ancient tale, preserved only in fragments, the four elementals are described as sitting together around a circle of stone. Fire rages and complains of being stifled. Ice remains silent, unblinking. Candy sings, trying to bring cheer, while slime drifts lazily across the floor, refusing to take shape. The tale does not end with a victory or resolution. Instead, it says that the circle turned and turned again, until balance was restored. The meaning is simple, yet profound. The elementals do not seek to defeat one another. They exist to remind each other of limits, to prevent any single force from dominating forever. There is also the strange, unsettling thought that their cycles may not be endless. What if one day the wheel does not turn and one of the elements fails to return? The show hints at this possibility during the elemental mini-arc, when Princess Bubblegum, Flame Princess, Slime Princess, and Ice King confront their shared legacy. Their powers, their conflicts, and their choices all suggest that the cycle could collapse if too much imbalance is allowed to grow. And if that were to happen, Oo itself might unravel, because without its elemental anchors, the world would have no rhythm to steady it. But for now, their story is one of survival. Through countless incarnations, through wars and disasters, through kingdoms rising and falling, they continue. Their sparks never fully extinguish. They leap into new vessels, learn old lessons in new forms, and play out their eternal dance again and again. Perhaps that is why their presence feels so dreamlike, so strangely familiar, because in their endless repetition, they are part of something greater than themselves, something that whispers to us about the cycles of our own lives. The first sparks of creation are not distant legends locked in dusty books. They are the pulse of fire in a campfire's glow, the hush of frost on a winter morning, the sweetness of shared candy on a birthday, the shifting puddle after a rainstorm. They live around us, quiet and constant, even if we do not see them. And in Oo, they are far more than symbols. They are characters, rulers, wanderers, and friends, carrying within them the weight of something much older than their own lives. As we rest here at the end of their beginnings, one truth lingers. The elementals are eternal not because they are perfect, but because they are flawed. Their anger, their loneliness, their joy, their unpredictability, these are not weaknesses to erase. They are the very reasons the world continues to turn. Balance is not a static state. It is motion, tension, the constant turning of the circle. Fire will rise, ice will fall, candy will spread, slime will seep, and each time the wheel will turn again. In the chapters ahead, we will follow them more closely. We will see how fire's passion shaped rulers and kingdoms, how ice's solitude carved both beauty and sorrow, how candy sweetness built empires of innocence and control, and how slime's fluid freedom ensured that nothing in ooh could remain unchanged forever. Each of them deserves their own place in the story and their own quiet exploration. But before we dive into their individual lives, let us carry with us the memory of their beginnings. Because even the brightest flame, the coldest frost, the sweetest candy, and the most fluid slime all began as sparks, as whispers in the world's first breath. The elementals remind us that creation is not a single moment in time. It is a cycle, a rhythm, an endless turning. And as long as the world exists, so too will they. When we think of fire, most of us imagine its brightness first. The flicker of a candle in the dark, the glow of a campfire on a cold night, the dance of flames that feels almost alive. Fire comforts us, gives us warmth, cooks our food, and lights our homes. But fire is also danger. It consumes, destroys, and can spiral out of control in the blink of an eye. In the world of ooh, this duality is not just symbolic. It lives, breathes, and rules in the form of the fire elemental. Of all the elementals, fire is perhaps the easiest to understand because it so closely mirrors our emotions. Think of anger, how it flares up suddenly, how it spreads, how it can leave behind ashes. Or think of love, that burning warmth in the chest that makes us bold, reckless, unstoppable. Fire does not hide what it is. It is passion in its purest form, raw and unfiltered. And so every vessel of the fire elemental carries with them this burden, to live with feelings that blaze too brightly, threatening to consume them and everything around them. The incarnation we know best, of course, is Flame Princess. Born to the Fire Kingdom, she inherited not only its crown, but its volatility. From the moment she was young, her power was seen as dangerous. Even her own father, Flame King, feared what she could become if her temper was not controlled. She grew up isolated, hidden away, not because she lacked strength, but because she had too much of it. That is the story of many fire elementals, feared, misunderstood, and often treated as threats rather than guardians. And yet, within Flame Princess, we see the truth of fire's nature. Yes, she is destructive when her anger flares. Yes, her flames can burn forests and scorch kingdoms, but her heart is also capable of warmth and light. We see her compassion when she seeks justice, her tenderness when she opens up to Finn, her honesty in confronting the world about who she is. She embodies fire not just as destruction, but as renewal, a blaze that clears away the old so that something new may grow. Looking back through the cycles of fire, we can imagine other vessels before her, warriors whose rage burned bright in battle, wanderers whose passion led them to inspire others, perhaps even rulers whose kingdoms thrived in the glow of their flames, only to crumble when that same fire grew too wild. None of their names remain, but their essence flows into Flame Princess, and through her, into the future of fire itself. The balance of fire is always the same struggle: how to carry great passion without being destroyed by it. We see this in the way Flame Princess wrestles with her temper. There are moments when she wants to burn the world in anger, and moments when she longs simply to be seen as more than her flames. Fire is not gentle, but it is honest. It cannot hide what it is, and that honesty is perhaps why it can be both so feared and so deeply loved. Think of the times fire has saved lives. A campfire in the depths of winter, a torch that leads a traveler through a dark cave, a flame that signals hope in the distance. Now think of the times fire has destroyed. Villages reduced to ash, forests blackened, kingdoms brought down in smoke. The fire elemental holds both of these truths in their hands. To deny either one would be to deny what fire is. Flame Princess's story is also one of growth. She begins as a symbol of danger, locked away, manipulated by her father and feared by many. But as she takes control of her kingdom, she learns that fire can be more than rage. She becomes a just ruler, willing to fight for fairness, willing to use her flames not just to destroy but to defend. She shows us that even the fiercest passions can be channeled into something brighter, something that gives life rather than only taking it. It is worth pausing here to reflect on what fire teaches us about ourselves. Each of us carries fire within us in our tempers, our desires, our ambitions. Left unchecked, these flames can burn bridges, harm those we love, and consume our peace. But when guided, when given purpose, they can illuminate the darkest nights. The fire elemental is not just a ruler in Ooh. She is a mirror of the fire in every heart, reminding us that passion is neither good nor evil. It is how we choose to use it that decides its legacy. When we picture fire, we often think first of its destructive side. Whole forests burning, homes reduced to ashes, civilizations undone in just a few hours of unchecked flame. And indeed, in the land of Ooh, fire has that reputation too. But just as often, fire is shown as a force that clears the old to make room for the new. Without fire, the forest floor would grow tangled, overrun with weeds and rot, never allowing fresh life to sprout. The same idea exists within the elemental of fire. She is not only a destroyer, but also a purifier, a guardian of transformation who clears away what is stagnant, so something more vibrant can take root. Fire's passion is deeply tied to this cycle. Every flicker of her flame carries an urgency and intensity that cannot easily be contained. When we look at the Fire Kingdom in Adventure Time, we can see how this energy manifests in its people. Their culture is full of extremes. They are quick to anger, quick to love, quick to protect, and quick to lash out. Their bodies, made of flame itself, mean that their emotions radiate literally and visibly. And so passion is not just an idea for them, it's the core of their existence. Think of Flame Princess, one of the most memorable incarnations of the fire elemental. Her story is a tapestry woven of love, anger, misunderstanding, and the struggle to find balance. From the moment we meet her, it is clear that she is both dangerous and vulnerable, embodying the paradox of fire itself. She longs to connect, to love and be loved, yet her flames threaten to consume those who draw too close. Even Finn, with all his bravery, finds himself scorched by her energy when he tries to get too near. This tension within Flame Princess mirrors the deeper role of the fire elemental. Fire tests boundaries. It asks the world, how close can you come? How much can you handle? How far can you push? It demands honesty because you cannot lie to fire. You either endure its heat or step away. This honesty, raw and unpolished, is the essence of fire's passion. It does not hide, it does not compromise, and it does not settle into stillness. Yet within all this intensity, there is beauty. Imagine a fire at night, crackling softly, its light dancing in waves of orange and red. There is warmth in it, a comfort that draws people near. In many ways, the fire elemental is this comfort too. She carries a sense of connection, of gathering, of pulling others into her orbit. When the people of Ooh build campfires, they sit close, sharing stories and warmth. That instinct to gather around flame is ancient, and it reflects the pull of the fire elemental herself. She draws the lonely and the cold, offering them light in their darkness. Flame Princess's relationship with Finn highlights another side of fire's passion, its ability to inspire growth. Finn, still young and learning about love, is challenged by her intensity. He realizes that love is not only about comfort or joy. It can also be about challenge, friction, and the work of understanding one another. Fire teaches him that passion is not simple, and that to truly connect with someone, you must learn to endure their heat without losing yourself to it. This lesson extends beyond Finn and Flame Princess. Throughout Ooh, the influence of the fire elemental shows up wherever transformation is needed. Whether it is the Fire Kingdom forcing others to confront their fear of heat, or the wild outbursts of emotion that lead to new understandings, fire keeps the world moving forward. Passion ensures that the world does not stagnate. It may hurt, it may burn, but without it, nothing would ever truly change. There's also a symbolic layer here. Fire is often associated with the heart, not just in the romantic sense, but in the sense of courage, willpower, and the spark that drives us forward. The fire elemental embodies this spark in its purest form. She is the flame that refuses to be extinguished, no matter how dark the night becomes. Even in times when Ooh faced destruction, the fire within its people, that passionate drive to keep moving, has carried them through. As we reflect on fire's role, it's worth pausing to notice how it contrasts with the other elementals. Where ice is calm and controlled, fire is restless and urgent. Where candy is nurturing and gentle, fire is demanding and fierce. Where slime is adaptive and playful, fire is uncompromising and sharp. Together, these differences are what make the balance work. Without fire, the world would grow too complacent, too still. With fire, there is always a reminder that change is necessary, even if it is uncomfortable. The land of Ooh shows us fire in many shades. There is the warmth of the campfire where Finn and Jake sit under the stars, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. That flame is gentle, protective, a small guardian against the darkness of the night, but travel just a little farther into the heart of the Fire Kingdom, and you'll find the other side of fire, lava rivers that roar and crack as they shift through blackened stone, towers that burn not with lamps, but with the very essence of molten life. Here, fire isn't a tool or a comfort. It is existence itself. Every citizen of the Fire Kingdom carries that essence within them, their bodies formed of flame and ash, their hearts beating with sparks instead of blood. It's a place where passion is not optional, but woven into the air like heat waves rising off stone. This duality, the hearth fire and the raging inferno, echoes through the fire elemental. The incarnation of fire must embody both nurture and destruction. Think of Flame Princess, whose journey is one of balance. As a child, her father, the Flame King, raised her to see her fire as purely destructive. He locked her away, fearing not only the world's safety, but also his own rule. Yet when she stepped into her role as the fire elemental, she had to learn that her flames could also illuminate, not just destroy. That arc is the very essence of fire's paradox. Passion can consume, but it can also fuel creativity, love, and change. The reincarnation cycle of the fire elemental ensures this lesson is never lost, even if it must be relearned across eras. Each new incarnation inherits not only the power of fire, but the emotional intensity that defines it. They are quick to ignite, whether in anger, in love, or in resolve. But fire also teaches impermanence. Flames eventually burn out. They demand fuel, and when it is gone, only embers remain. The fire elemental must face this truth, that passion, no matter how bright, is never eternal in its first form. It transforms, shifts, and seeks new expression. In the wider balance of Ao, fire plays an irreplaceable role. Without it, there is no growth. Seeds need warmth to sprout. Life needs heat to endure cold nights. And civilizations need fire to forge tools and build homes. Even magic relies on fire in subtle ways, as spells often draw on elemental sparks. Yet unchecked fire is ruinous. The Fire Kingdom knows this intimately. Their borders are marked by scorched earth, a reminder of how easily passion can consume beyond what it should. And so the fire elemental stands as a guardian of the delicate line between vitality and devastation. To truly understand fire's passion, though, we must also understand its emotional mirror. Passion is not only about destruction or growth, it is about presence. Fire demands attention. Even a single candle can draw every eye in a room, its small flame dancing unpredictably, alive in ways stone or water never appear to be. That's the essence of the fire elemental. They are always seen, always felt. Their energy pulls others in, sometimes dangerously close, but always irresistibly. The other elementals may fade into quiet cycles, but the fire elemental blazes, leaving impressions that ripple through history. Flame Princess embodies this presence in every interaction she has. When she laughs, the flames flicker warmly around her, like a shared secret of joy. When she is angered, the world responds. The ground cracks, air wavers, and her hair flares like a torch. Her very being resists subtlety, just as fire refuses to be ignored. This is not a flaw, but a truth. Passion must be visible. It cannot hide. That visibility is part of what makes fire's energy so transformative, because once it reveals itself, it changes the space around it. What is also fascinating is how fire interacts with the other elements. With ice, it becomes a rivalry, each canceling the other's power in dramatic bursts of steam. With slime, fire struggles as it slips and sputters against its damp and shifting nature. With candy, however, there's a strange harmony. Candy burns, it melts, it caramelizes, transforming under heat into something new. This speaks to how the fire elemental connects with the cycles of change. Fire does not simply erase, it alters, and often that alteration is what allows new forms to exist. In this way, the fire elemental does not stand alone as a destroyer, but as a partner in creation. Without fire, there is no forging of swords, no baking of bread, no glowing glass shaped into delicate forms. Every civilization in Uu that has risen and fallen has done so with fire at its heart. Whether they controlled it, feared it, or were undone by it, fire was always there. The elemental ensures this truth persists, guiding fire's role as both a threat and a necessity. And perhaps the most profound lesson of fire's passion is this: to live is to burn, even if only for a little while. To feel deeply, to act boldly, to shine brightly in the face of darkness that is the fire elemental's gift. Their existence whispers to us that it is better to blaze, even briefly, than to never ignite at all. As the fire elemental's story winds across the ages, what stands out most is not just the destruction or the beauty of the flames, but the way fire adapts to every age and every heart it touches. Unlike water or stone, fire is never passive. It never simply waits. It is restless, always seeking a vessel, always needing something to burn, something to fuel it forward. In this way, the fire elemental is never just a background presence in the world. It is an actor, a force that changes things merely by existing. Think about how fire often marks the turning points in Adventure Time's history. The Great Mushroom War left behind fire in the form of radiation, bombs, and smoldering ruins. In that chaos, fire didn't simply fade. It reorganized itself into something new, carrying forward in the rebirth of the Fire Kingdom, and through the figure of Flame Princess. We see fire as both destiny and choice. She is born into destruction but grows toward balance, teaching us that even the wildest flames can be shaped, not by control, but by understanding. The element of fire also reflects a truth about creation itself. It shows us that nothing is ever static. Worlds end, civilizations collapse, towers crumble, but in their ashes, new beginnings take form. Without fire, the old would linger forever. Fire clears the stage so that something fresh may appear. And when you think about it, that role is both terrifying and profoundly comforting. Terrifying because it means nothing lasts forever. Comforting because it means that no darkness, no stagnation, can hold dominion forever either. There will always come a spark to shift the world into something new. Many cultures across U, whether they are small villages of grass people, bands of nomads, or the ancient kingdom still holding on to remnants of the past, tell stories about fire in this way. For some, fire is the messenger of the gods. For others, it is a spirit of endless hunger. And for some who understand its duality, fire is seen as a teacher, reminding them that passion without purpose burns out quickly. But passion with direction can light the way for generations. What makes the fire elemental unique compared to the other three is its deeply personal nature. Ice speaks of stillness and timeless memory. Candy embodies community, sweetness, and comfort. Slime reveals adaptability and endless change. But fire rests in the heart. It is the only one of the elements that directly mirrors the emotions of those it touches. When Flame Princess grows angry, her flames flare. When she is calm, they soften. Fire never hides its truth. It expresses feeling instantly and without hesitation. In this sense, fire is honest, sometimes brutally so, but never deceptive. It is what it is, and it invites those around it to be the same. As the wheel of reincarnation turns, the fire elemental will always return, because without it, the world risks sinking into cold stagnation. Ice would freeze everything in time. Candy would cradle the world in endless comfort, never letting anything evolve. Slime would wash away, form itself until nothing held meaning. Fire keeps the balance by making sure that the old is burned away and the new has space to take root. It doesn't always ask permission, but in its own fierce way, it ensures the dance of life continues. And so as we close this segment, picture a single flame flickering in the dark. It could be the glow of a campfire, the warmth of a candle, or the spark of anger in a heart that longs for justice. That flame is small, yes, but it carries within it infinite possibility. It can grow into a kingdom or flicker out in an instant. It can protect or it can destroy. The fire elemental is not just a ruler of flames, but a symbol of that choice, reminding us that passion, when nurtured, can light the path through even the darkest of nights. Now that we've explored fire in all its restless glory, its passion and danger, its honesty and rebirth, our journey will soon carry us to another realm of elemental power. For if fire is movement, drive, and burning desire, then its opposite lies waiting in the cold silence of ice. In the next part of our story, we'll slip into that frozen world and explore the slow, haunting stillness of the ice elemental, a being not of passion, but of memory, time, and the quiet longing of eternity. Hey there, Sleepyheads. Now that we've wandered through the blazing paths of fire and passion, it's time to step into a quieter, colder place. Tonight, we wrap ourselves in the chilling embrace of the ice elemental. The world of frost has always held a mysterious beauty, hasn't it? Cold can be harsh and unyielding, but it also preserves, it stills, it calms. And at the heart of that frozen stillness lies the soul of the ice element. The element of ice is unlike fire, which bursts and flares. Ice is subtle, patient, and quiet, moving not in sudden explosions, but in steady, inevitable drift. If fire is the heartbeat of passion, then ice is the deep breath that follows, the long pause where everything slows to silence. And when you listen closely, that silence has a voice of its own. It is the voice of solitude, of timelessness, of a world that waits. The ice elemental, in every incarnation, carries this solitude with them. They are not merely rulers of snowstorms and frozen lands, but guardians of a deeper, more difficult truth, that sometimes life is about stepping back, about letting go, about surrendering to stillness. Where fire represents movement and change, ice holds the lessons of restraint and reflection. Imagine an endless frozen tundra where the snow never melts and the stars stretch forever. That is the soul space of the ice elemental. Long before the age of Au, the first ice elemental was born from the quiet of creation itself. When the world cooled after its fiery beginning, the frost took root, and with it came a presence, a consciousness bound to the chill. In myth, it is said that the ice elemental was not born of chaos, but of stillness, as though the universe itself needed a balance to temper the fire. This figure was often described as contemplative, a watcher more than a doer, preferring the company of silence over the noise of others. But silence is not always kind. With the element of ice comes isolation, and with isolation comes loneliness. The ice elemental, no matter their form, often finds themselves apart from the world. Some tales say that this distance is chosen, a mark of wisdom and self-control. Other stories whisper that it is a curse, that their frozen touch keeps them from holding on to what they love. In both versions, however, one truth remains. The ice elemental's heart beats slower than most, caught in a rhythm of waiting, longing, and letting go. Think of the figures we've known in this lineage: Urgence, Evergreen, the first great wizard of ice, a teacher as brilliant as he was cold. His mastery of frost magic was unmatched, yet his heart carried the arrogance and detachment of one who believed himself above others. Evergreen was not unfeeling, but his pride froze him in place, leaving him unable to connect with those who needed him most. He represents one of the great dangers of the element, that in seeking solitude, you risk becoming trapped within it. Then much later in time came Simon Petrikov. His story is perhaps the most heartbreaking reflection of what it means to be bound to the element of ice. Simon was not born an elemental, but through the cursed crown he became its vessel, inheriting the weight of isolation in its harshest form. The crown preserved him, gave him power, but it also stripped away his warmth, his connection, his humanity. With every spell he cast, the ice seeped deeper into his soul until Simon became the Ice King, a man lost to loneliness, his memory and love buried beneath layers of frost. It is in Simon's tragedy that we see the full duality of the ice elemental. On one hand, there is strength and endurance. Ice can withstand centuries, hold back decay, keep what is fragile safe. Yet on the other hand, there is the chill of disconnection. What is preserved may never truly live again, frozen in place, unreachable. This is why the ice elemental is often painted as both protector and prisoner. They guard what is sacred, but at the cost of their own warmth. And so when we look at the element of ice, we are not only looking at snowflakes and glaciers. We are looking at the story of separation, of the human heart struggling against the cold of eternity. To hold the mantle of ice is to understand the burden of watching life pass by, unable to truly join in, always set a little apart. That is the essence of ice and isolation. Ice in the world of Ooh has always been more than just a temperature or a season. It is memory. It is preservation. It is the force that slows down time, that keeps things from slipping away too quickly. Where fire burns with intensity and urgency, ice lingers and waits. It is patient, perhaps endlessly so, holding on to fragments of the past that the other elements would let go of. That patience can be both a gift and a curse. For those touched by ice, nothing is ever fully gone, but nothing is ever fully alive either. It is like pressing a flower between the pages of a book. You save it forever, but it will never bloom again. To truly understand the essence of ice, we need to step into the long, winding corridors of its history, both mythic and tragic. In the grand cycle of reincarnation, there is always an ice elemental, a being chosen to embody the qualities of stillness, preservation, and solitude. Each reincarnation carries the weight of its predecessors, shaped by the icy spirit that lingers across lifetimes. Unlike fire, which thrives on change and bursts of passion, the ice elemental resists change, often struggling with the burden of holding on to too much. Their very existence is tied to a paradox, to endure forever while watching the world move on without them. Urgence. Evergreen, one of the most ancient ice elementals, is a name whispered in legend. He was stern, wise, and in many ways a reflection of the cold he wielded. In his time, the world faced threats so massive that even elemental magic seemed powerless against them. Evergreen sought a crown, an artifact, capable of channeling ice magic beyond mortal limits. It was this desperate need to preserve life, to stop the destruction, that led to the creation of a tool which would echo across millennia. That crown, though born of good intentions, became a prison of madness, twisting the minds of those who wore it, yet preserving them in ways no natural force could. This is where the theme of isolation becomes most clear. Ice does not simply freeze the body, it isolates the heart. Those who embody the element are often set apart, not only because of their powers, but because of their temperament. They are observers more than participants, watching the world from a distance, sometimes longing to join in, sometimes resigned to their solitude. Evergreen himself, despite his strength, was often alone. He demanded perfection from those around him, unable to fully trust, unwilling to let others close. And perhaps that too was the ice speaking through him, a refusal to melt, a refusal to soften. Centuries later, the crown found its way into the hands of Petrikov, the gentle antiquarian whose fate would intertwine with the ice elemental's essence in one of the most heartbreaking tales of Ooh. Simon was not chosen by destiny to be the ice elemental in the traditional sense, yet by wearing the crown, he inherited the mantle in a fractured, twisted way. His story reflects the sorrow of ice more than any other. Unlike Evergreen, who embodied the element with pride and control, Simon was consumed by it, losing himself piece by piece to its whispers. He became the Ice King, a figure both comedic and tragic, locked away from the world not by walls or enemies, but by his own crumbling identity. What Simon's story reveals is the deepest truth of ice. It does not simply freeze. It isolates. It distances. It preserves at the cost of warmth. In Simon's case, his memories of Betty and his love for her were preserved forever, but they became untouchable, like frozen relics in a museum. He could never move past them, never let them fade naturally. That is the burden of ice. Nothing is allowed to flow. Everything must stay locked in place. And while that may seem like safety, in the long run, it is suffocating. As we drift through the story, you may notice how different the rhythm of ice feels compared to fire. Where fire surged forward, racing with energy, ice asks us to pause, to reflect, to linger in silence. Even the landscapes of ice reflect this. Vast glaciers, silent tundras, and frozen lakes all have a stillness that makes time feel irrelevant. There is no rush, no urgency, just quiet, endless waiting. For some, that is comforting. For others, unbearable. Yet within this quiet lies an important role in the balance of the elements. Fire teaches us to move, to change, to burn bright while we can. Ice reminds us that some things are worth holding on to, that not everything should slip away too quickly. Without ice, life would be all chaos, passion burning out as soon as it begins. Ice steadies the flame, offers a counterbalance, a way to ensure that moments are not lost forever. Even if the cost is solitude, the lesson it offers is profound. And so the ice elemental is often painted as a tragic figure, but perhaps that is too narrow. To preserve, after all, is not only to lose, but also to protect. Countless treasures, stories, and histories would have been erased if not for the touch of ice. In its stillness, it keeps things safe, waiting for the world to be ready to remember them again. If fire is the language of the heart, ice is the language of silence. It does not rush forward with bold declarations, nor does it demand attention with dramatic gestures. Instead, it endures, it stills, it waits. Ice teaches us that not all truths are found in motion or noise. Some truths reveal themselves only when the world grows quiet enough to listen. In the land of Oo, the element of ice manifests not only in the frozen north, but in the stillness that comes after storms, in the quiet loneliness of snow-covered mountains, and in the quieting of memory itself. Those touched by the ice elemental cycle often carry an air of solitude, as if they are fated to walk alone even in the company of others. This is not a punishment, but a gift misunderstood. For through solitude comes reflection, and through reflection comes wisdom. The ice elemental represents the part of existence that forces us to slow down, to stop chasing the next spark, and instead sit with the weight of time. Fire may burn brightly in the moment, but ice reminds us of what endures long after the flames die down. One of the earliest known ice elementals was Urgent's Evergreen, the ancient wizard of the crown. He was a figure of great pride and even greater ambition, believing himself capable of shaping destiny through the artifact he helped forge. His story reminds us of the sharp edges that come with isolation. Evergreen believed himself above others, unwilling to trust or confide, and in the end, his pride led to his downfall. His legacy endured not in warmth or fellowship, but in the loneliness carried by the crown he left behind. Later, we see this theme carried forward into Simon Petrikov, whose story embodies both the tragedy and the quiet resilience of the ice elemental. Simon did not seek power for himself, nor isolation for the sake of pride. Instead, isolation was thrust upon him, creeping slowly into his mind and soul as the crown took its hold. His love for Betty, his care for young Marceline, and his desire to protect humanity became buried under the weight of the crown's magic. In Simone, we see that isolation is not always chosen. Sometimes it arrives as a condition of survival. Yet even in Simon's tragic transformation into the Ice King, there is a strange beauty. His loneliness became a shield, protecting him from the pain of memory. His babbling songs, his nonsensical ramblings, and his constant need for companionship were all fragments of a deeper truth. Beneath the ice, the man who once loved so deeply was still there, frozen in time, waiting for the thaw that might never come. The cycle of the ice elemental is not one of destruction or passion, but of endurance. The frozen heart does not shatter easily. It holds. It survives. Even when the world forgets, even when warmth seems lost, ice persists. This persistence is both a blessing and a curse. For while it grants strength and survival, it also carries with it the danger of detachment. To endure too long in silence is to risk becoming untouchable, unreachable, and perhaps even unrecognizable. When we think of the element of ice, we often think of coldness as a negative trait. But in truth, coldness can be protection. The ice elemental represents the capacity to set boundaries, to create distance when closeness becomes harmful, and to hold back when rushing forward would bring destruction. It teaches us that not every fire should be fed, and not every storm should be fought head-on. Sometimes survival means stepping back, freezing the world around you until it becomes safe to move again. This theme runs deeply throughout the stories of Ooh. In the lonely expanse of ice, where storms rage and silence lingers, characters are forced to confront themselves. The land of snow strips away distractions and noise, leaving only what is essential. To journey into the frozen north is to step into the heart of the ice elemental's lesson. That solitude is not emptiness, but clarity. And yet clarity can be painful. For Simon, the clarity of memory was stolen. For Evergreen, clarity became pride. And for the cycle of ice elementals yet to come, clarity might mean facing the weight of loss again and again. But within this cycle, there is also hope. For every frozen heart carries the memory of warmth. Beneath every glacier lies water, waiting to move once more. The ice elemental reminds us that even in our loneliest moments, the possibility of renewal is never truly gone. Stillness is not the end, but a pause before transformation. So as we sit with the lessons of the ice elemental, we begin to understand that isolation is not simply about being cut off. It is about learning to live with silence, to embrace reflection, and to carry the strength of endurance. In the quiet, we discover truths that fire could never reveal. In the cold, we find the resilience that allows us to keep moving, even when warmth feels far away. And perhaps most importantly, in the stories of those touched by ice, we see that even the loneliest soul carries within them the possibility of connection. It may be buried, it may be frozen, but it endures, waiting for the right moment to be set free again. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of the ice elemental is the way their identity seems to melt away beneath the weight of their crown. While fire thrives on individuality and bold self-expression, ice drifts toward the opposite, toward suppression, even erasure. We see this most clearly in Simon's story. The man who once loved deeply, who played with Marceline and carried her across the wasteland, was slowly buried under the Ice King's ramblings. His love, his laughter, his humanity slipped away like footprints filling with snow. What was left was a persona shaped not by who he was, but by what the crown demanded of him. This invites an unsettling question about the nature of the element itself. Does the ice elemental strip away identity as part of its design, or is it only the curse of the crown that forces this dissolution? We cannot know for sure, but the pattern is there. Urgent's Evergreen was rigid, harsh, almost inhuman in his obsession with order. Simon Petrikov faded into obscurity beneath the madness of ice. Even Patience St. Pim, who was among the more playful incarnations, still kept herself detached, distant, and ultimately isolated from the world around her. No matter how the cycle turned, ice seemed to steer its vessel toward the same end: detachment, loneliness, and stillness. Yet as cold and isolating as this path is, it is not without purpose. For without ice, fire would consume unchecked. Without barriers, passions would destroy the fragile balance of the world. Ice provides limits. Ice demands patience. Ice is the wall that reminds fire it cannot burn forever, and in that way, even its loneliness serves as a gift. To be the ice elemental is to carry the burden of being apart, so that others may flourish together. It is a deeply sacrificial role, even if those who live it do not always choose it willingly. There is also an almost poetic symmetry in how ice craves connection, yet often ruins it by its very nature. Simon longed for companionship, but the madness of the crown alienated everyone. Patience delighted in stirring up the other elementals, but in doing so, she sowed chaos and distrust. Evergreen wanted to protect his world from destruction, but his arrogance and coldness left him isolated, ignored by those who might have helped him. Ice seems to reach for warmth, but never quite holds it. It brushes against connection only to watch it slip away like melting frost. And still, within that tragedy lies beauty. For what is ice but frozen water? Still, unmoving, quiet. But when given time, even the thickest ice eventually softens. Even the most frigid winter eventually yields to spring. The same is true of the ice elemental. Beneath the layers of detachment and solitude, there is always the potential for renewal. We see this in Simon's story most powerfully. After centuries of being lost within the icy madness of the crown, he eventually found freedom. He thawed. And in doing so, he reminded us that even the coldest heart can one day beat warm again. The element of ice also speaks to cycles of memory. Fire blazes and forgets, but ice remembers. Think of how glaciers trap air bubbles from ancient times, preserving echoes of ages long gone. Ice is history frozen in place, untouched by the chaos of the present. In the same way, the ice elemental often embodies a connection to the past, a kind of living memory. Evergreen carried with him the ancient knowledge of his time, but refused to pass it on with compassion. Simon clung desperately to his memories of Betty and Marceline, even as the crown corroded his mind. Patience seemed to awaken with a sense of knowledge older than anyone else around her. Ice holds on. Ice preserves. But the cost of preservation is often stagnation, a refusal or inability to move forward. So when we think of the ice elemental, we are invited to sit with a strange paradox. On one hand, ice is lifeless, unmoving, barren. On the other, it is essential, protective, even nurturing in hidden ways. It shields the earth. It guards its memories. It holds its shape against the restless push of fire and time. And while those who carry its mantle often suffer, they also bear witness to truths no other being could hold. They become the silent watchers, the frozen hearts who ensure that the world does not burn itself away. And maybe that is why the stories of the ice elemental stir such quiet melancholy in us. Because in some ways, we recognize their struggle. We all know what it feels like to retreat into stillness, to hide behind walls, to freeze ourselves from pain, even if it means closing off joy. We all know the cost of distance and the ache of wanting to belong but feeling unable to. The ice elemental magnifies this universal human experience and stretches it across lifetimes until their loneliness becomes a reflection of our own. As the snow settles around us in this part of the tale, we can almost hear the hush of a frozen forest, the stillness of ice glistening under pale moonlight. There is beauty there, a beauty made sharper because it is fleeting. For even the ice elemental cannot last forever. The crown may pass, the cycle may turn, and the walls of frost may eventually crack. But for a time, they hold the silence of the world in their hands, and in that silence, we find both sorrow and peace. And so the story of the ice elemental rests like frost on a window pane, clear yet fragile, cold yet strangely comforting. Their role in the balance of ooh is as vital as the warmth of fire or the sweetness of candy. For without the chill of winter, spring could not feel so welcome. Without the solitude of silence, laughter could not sound so bright. Ice teaches us the value of stillness, of patience, of bearing burdens no one else will carry. This is the tale of Candy and Innocence, a story that sparkles with laughter and light, but carries its own subtle mysteries. So tuck yourself in, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to sink into the sweet landscapes of imagination as we uncover the story of the candy elemental. When most people think of candy, the first images that come to mind are playful and comforting. Bright colors, soft sugar, the kind of delights you might remember from childhood. And in the land of ooh, candy has become a whole civilization, its people smiling, cheerful, and whimsical. Yet beneath that playful exterior lies an ancient truth. Long before the Candy Kingdom became the powerful nation we see in Adventure Time, there existed an elemental force that embodied sweetness and innocence in its purest form. This was the Candy Elemental, a being who represented not only sugar and delight, but the very essence of gentleness and joy. But what does it mean for innocence itself to be a cosmic power? To understand that, we have to remember what the other elementals stood for. Fire embodies passion, destruction, and transformation. Ice embodies isolation, silence, and preservation. Slime, as we'll see later, embodies adaptability and fluidity. And Candy is about togetherness, about kindness, about softness in a world that can so easily become hard and cruel. Candy soothes, Candy comforts. And yet, Candy also deceives in its simplicity, for innocence can be fragile, fleeting, and even dangerous when it refuses to see the world as it truly is. The earliest tales of the Candy Elemental are said to come from the time shortly after the Mushroom War. In those fractured years when the world was scarred and civilizations crumbled, there was a deep hunger, not just for food, but for kindness, for warmth, for something that would remind people of home. It is in this aching emptiness that Candy's elemental spirit blossomed. Where others sought to dominate, Candy sought to comfort. Where others divided, Candy gathered. Where fire burned and ice froze, Candy tried to heal. Imagine for a moment the birth of this elemental spirit. Perhaps it appeared as a gentle glow in the ruins of a broken world, taking form where children laughed despite the chaos, or where a single piece of candy passed between hands became a spark of hope. Innocence is not always ignorance. Sometimes it is resilience, the decision to see sweetness even when all around you feels bitter. As with the other elementals, the spirit of Candy was not simply an idea, it became a being. She was known in later times as Princess Bubblegum. But before she was a ruler, before she was a scientist, she was something much older. Her essence was woven from sugar, yes, but also from the unyielding need for kindness in the face of despair. The Candy Elemental was not weak, as some might assume, but rather one of the most enduring forces of all. After all, wars can rage, storms can destroy, fires can burn, but people will always search for joy and comfort when the fighting is over. What makes the Candy Elemental so fascinating is the duality within her. On the surface, she is a symbol of innocence and lightheartedness. Yet as we watch Princess Bubblegum throughout Adventure Time, we notice how carefully she protects her kingdom. how sharply she defends her people, and how she hides layers of complexity behind her sweet exterior. That is the secret of candy's elemental power. It looks harmless, but it holds strength in numbers, unity, and the ability to endure. Innocence might look fragile, but it can outlast even the harshest winters. Think of how the Candy Kingdom itself is built. Its people, made from gumdrops and caramels, peppermint and chocolate, appear silly and naive. Yet together, they create a society that functions, thrives, and grows. This mirrors the elemental truth of candy. The strength of sweetness lies in community. One piece of candy might crumble, but a kingdom of candy can stand tall. Innocence is not just about play. It's about trust, about believing that others will protect you as you protect them. And perhaps that is what makes candy such a necessary balance in the world of ooh. Fire burns, ice isolates, slime adapts. But candy reminds everyone of what they are fighting for, the joy of life itself, the small comforts that make survival worth it. As we follow the trail of the candy elemental, we see how her power stretches beyond sugar and sweetness. It is about creating a safe haven in a dangerous world, a place where people can laugh, sing, and feel at ease. This is why Princess Bubblegum builds her kingdom the way she does. Every gumdrop citizen, every silly little peppermint, is part of a larger vision. It may look simple, but it is one of the most powerful expressions of elemental energy in all of ooh. Now, before we wander deeper into Bubblegum's story, let's pause for a moment. Picture yourself in a land of candy, soft pink skies, gumdrop hills, rivers flowing with syrup, and the smell of sugar in the air. Let your mind sink into that comfort, that playfulness. It is easy to dismiss such a world as childish or silly, but in truth, it speaks to something every person longs for. The candy elemental reminds us that innocence is not a weakness. It is a sanctuary. If the element of fire represented unrestrained passion and the element of ice represented sorrowful distance, then candy stands as the other side of the spectrum. It is softness. It is safety. It is comfort given shape. In the mythology of ooh, and especially in the legacy of the elementals, candy is not only a force of sweetness and delight, but also a strange reminder of what humanity once longed for in the aftermath of its destruction. Peace, familiarity, and a kind of innocence that could survive the harshness of a broken world. The candy elemental is not just about sugar and treats. She is about that childlike yearning for joy in its purest form. Imagine a world scarred by the great mushroom war ashes still smoldering, skies filled with a haunting silence. In those shadows, candy arises as a dream of something soft, harmless, and safe. It becomes a balm to the pain that humanity left behind. This is why candy, as an elemental force, carries with it such a paradox. On one hand, it is sweet and playful, designed to shield the mind from the cruelties of the world. On the other, it can smother, trapping everything in its sticky grasp, suffocating the growth of complexity in favor of endless comfort. At the center of this paradox is Princess Bubblegum, the modern embodiment of the candy elemental. But unlike the pure forces of fire and ice, Bubblegum is not just the element itself. She is both a creator and a caretaker, building an entire kingdom of candy beings who live under her guidance. These creatures, while adorable and whimsical, also reflect the element's strange danger. Because what is candy, if not an endless sweetness that denies bitterness, pain, and even freedom? Too much of it, and the world loses its depth. Too much candy, and life becomes hollow, preserved in a childlike bubble that never allows maturity. When we think about Bubblegum, we can see how this force manifests. She rules her kingdom with grace and kindness, but also with calculation and control. Every gumdrop citizen, every candy corn soldier, every peppermint or marshmallow being none of them truly exist outside of her will. They are shaped by her science, her design, her imagination. In this way, the candy elemental is not only innocence, but also artificiality. It is sweetness crafted to erase sorrow, yet beneath the frosting lies something unsettling. A world where everyone smiles because they were made to smile. And yet for many, candy still provides what the other elements cannot. Fire burns, ice isolates, but candy offers companionship. It creates a sense of belonging, a community where no one feels alone. This is why Ooze people so often find themselves drawn to the Candy Kingdom. There is laughter, music, games, and festivals. There are walls of bubblegum that feel soft to the touch, and skies filled with the scent of sugar. It feels safe, even if that safety is carefully constructed. Still, the element of candy does not escape the laws of balance that bind all four forces. Just as fire risks consuming all in its flames, and ice risks freezing life into silence, candy too can overstep. We saw this most vividly during the Elementals arc, when Bubblegum's power surged out of control. In that version of reality, the candy force consumed Ooh, transforming everything into syrup-coated, smiling versions of itself. Trees became candy canes, rocks became gumdrops, and even people lost themselves in a glaze of sweetness. There was no sorrow, no struggle, no individuality left, only the sticky perfection of a candy-coated world. This vision is as terrifying as it is strangely comforting. For some, a universe without pain sounds like paradise. For others, it is the loss of everything that makes life meaningful. Without sadness, joy has no contrast. Without struggle, triumph has no value. Candy, when taken too far, is the erasure of reality's edges. It is the final surrender to comfort, a dream from which no one can awaken. So when we think of candy as an element, we must think not only of lollipops and gumdrops, but also of that deep yearning within the human heart, the desire to be safe, to be shielded from hurt, to return to the innocence of childhood where everything was sweet and nothing could truly harm us. The candy elemental embodies that longing, but as with all desires unchecked, it can become dangerous. What makes Bubblegum fascinating is how she straddles this line. She knows the seductive power of candy, and she wields it with care, often bending it to her will for protection rather than domination. But even she cannot escape the truth of her nature. Candy will always call for more. More sweetness, more comfort, more smiles, until the very idea of conflict disappears. And in a world as complex as Ooh, can such a dream ever truly survive? Candy, at first glance, might seem like the most harmless and whimsical of all the elements. Sweetness, playfulness, and joy are the qualities that come to mind. But within the world of Adventure Time, candy carries more meaning than a simple sugar rush. It represents innocence, community, and a kind of optimism that can endure even in a post-apocalyptic world. Yet beneath this light-hearted surface, the candy elemental holds immense power. And with that power comes a hidden weight. When we think about the candy elemental, Princess Bubblegum is the immediate face of the role. She was born from the remnants of a candy elemental essence, crafted from the gum of the elemental herself. In this way, Bubblegum is not only a ruler, but a reincarnation, carrying the traits, burdens, and instincts of her predecessor. Her love for science and invention, her strong sense of responsibility, and even her more controlling nature reflect the paradox of candy, sweet and welcoming on one hand, strict and commanding on the other. Candy magic does not roar like fire or chill like ice, nor does it overwhelm like slime. Instead, it soothes, comforts, and disarms. In the elemental balance, candy is the shield against despair. It is the element that reminds mortals and immortals alike of the value of joy and connection. Think about how, throughout the series, the Candy Kingdom becomes a hub for other characters. Finn, Jake, Marceline, and so many others find themselves gathering in the warm glow of its sugary streets. That's candy magic at work. The ability to create safe spaces that draw people together. Yet candy also has its darker side. Innocence, when pushed too far, can lead to naivety. Too much joy can make a society complacent, unprepared for outside threats. And Princess Bubblegum herself illustrates another layer of complexity. Though she is tied to candy, she often shows a willingness to manipulate or control others in order to protect her people. That sharp edge in her character reveals that even candy, the sweetest of elements, is not immune to corruption or domination. It's interesting to notice how candy, unlike the other elements, seems almost childlike in tone. Characters like Peppermint Butler, Cinnamon Bun, and countless candy people embody silliness and whimsy. Their innocence makes them lovable, but it also leaves them vulnerable. During the Elementals arc in Adventure Time, when Patient St. Pym froze the others, Candy's weakness was clear. Without balance, Candy cannot stand against destructive forces. Innocence alone cannot win battles. It requires protection and resilience. At the same time, candy possesses an enduring resilience in its own way. It's not about force or strength, but about community. The Candy Kingdom is rarely ever one hero fighting alone. It's an entire society, leaning on one another, powered by shared belief and trust. This echoes the elemental philosophy. While fire represents individuality, ice symbolizes solitude, and slime embraces change, candy thrives through unity. It suggests that togetherness can be its own form of strength. Princess Bubblegum exemplifies this balance perfectly. She knows her people's innocence leaves them open to danger, so she becomes their protector, even if it means sacrificing her own joy. Her rule is often portrayed as strict, but her care for her kingdom comes from the elemental instinct to preserve innocence. In her, we see Candy's true complexity, the desire to remain pure and joyful, but with the heavy responsibility of shielding that joy from harm. The cycles of the Candy Elemental reflect this duality. Each reincarnation carries a spirit of warmth and kindness, yet the weight of leadership often tempers that sweetness. Over centuries, Candy's elemental role ensures that, no matter how dark the world becomes, there will always be pockets of lightheartedness. In a sense, Candy provides a reminder of why survival matters in the first place, not just to live, but to live joyfully, surrounded by love and laughter. One of the most fascinating aspects of candy as an element is its ability to heal. Unlike fire's destructive bursts or ice's freezing isolation, candy restores. Think of the times when Finn and Jake enjoy sweets or celebrations in the kingdom. These moments are not just filler scenes. They're restorative pauses, breaths of relief in a world often consumed by chaos. Candy magic gives that balance, reminding the other elements that happiness is as necessary for survival as fire, ice, or slime. Even the contrast between Peppermint Butler and Princess Bubblegum demonstrates how candy can stretch in unexpected directions. Peppermint Butler, though part of the Candy Kingdom, is deeply tied to dark magic and secret knowledge. He shows us that candy's innocence is not absolute. It can coexist with darker influences. His presence hints that beneath every sweet surface lies complexity, a reminder that innocence should not be mistaken for weakness. And when we look at Candy's place in the great elemental war, we see that it was both fragile and essential. Candy stood as the reason to fight, the symbol of what was at risk of being lost. Without Candy, the balance tips into despair. Without innocence, there is no motivation to keep chaos at bay. When we reflect on the Candy elemental's role in the grand design of the universe, we begin to see how innocence itself is a form of resilience. Innocence is not simply the absence of corruption, but the ability to begin again, to rebuild after catastrophe, to imagine joy where there was once sorrow. After the Mushroom War, it would have been easy for the world to drown in despair. The ice had spread across the land. Firestorms had scarred the earth. The lingering shadows of chaos and destruction threatened to consume everything. But then, slowly, sweetness returned. Not in the form of weapons or kingdoms of steel, but in gumdrops, candy cornfields, and the laughter of creatures born from sugar and imagination. It was absurd, and it was beautiful. That absurdity is what made it strong. Princess Bubblegum exemplifies this power of resilience. Even when faced with destruction or betrayal, she is quick to rebuild. Her very nature allows her to construct new life and new beginning, even if those beginnings are not always perfect. Peppermint Butler, Gumball Guardians, and countless Candy citizens, each of them came into being because of her nature as the Candy elemental. This power of creation and restoration is what keeps the balance between the harsher, more destructive forces of fire and ice. In a way, Candy is the soft landing after the fall, the gentle hand that lifts the world back up. It's interesting to note how this cycle of sweetness is not entirely stable. Innocence is fragile, and it can easily be manipulated. Peppermint Butler, though loyal, constantly flirts with darkness. Lemon Grab, another creation of Bubblegum, becomes a reminder that innocence, when twisted, can grow into something uncomfortable and broken. Even the Candy people, with all their cheer, can turn panicked and destructive when chaos threatens them. This fragility does not make the Candy elemental weak. It makes her essential. Without that fragile innocence, the world would have no compass to remind it of what is worth fighting for. One of the most profound moments that highlights this is when Princess Bubblegum shows compassion toward her enemies. Whether it is healing those who have wronged her, making space for redemption, or holding on to the idea that even in a world scarred by war, kindness has value, she embodies the idea that innocence can coexist with wisdom. She has lived through centuries of chaos, yet she still chooses sweetness as her anchor. That choice makes her a true embodiment of her element. From a symbolic perspective, the Candy elemental is childhood itself, a part of us that never entirely fades away. No matter how old we become, no matter how hardened by reality, there is always that inner memory of joy, of sweetness, of believing in simple wonders. The Candy elemental is that spark carried into adulthood, reminding us that imagination and kindness are not childish, but essential. That is why she has such a powerful role in maintaining cosmic balance. When fire burns too bright, when ice isolates too deeply, when slime threatens to consume everything, Candy steps in and says, "Let's rebuild, let's play, let's laugh again." Even in the later parts of the series, when Bubblegum faces the most severe challenges, she continues to reflect this elemental cycle. Her kingdom crumbles and rises again. She loses trust and regains it. She doubts herself and yet chooses to keep moving forward. All of these traits are reflections of innocence, not as naivety, but as strength of spirit. The Candy elemental is proof that sweetness is not weakness. It is power that nourishes, power that creates, and power that binds communities together. In the mythology of Adventure Time, each elemental represents an aspect of the world's ongoing story. Fire gives passion, ice offers wisdom through stillness, slime ensures cycles of renewal, and candy restores hope. Together they form a balance that keeps the multiverse alive. If any one of them were missing, the scales would tip into despair. Candy and innocence are the glue of that balance. They are the reminder that after every ending, life can taste sweet again. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson the candy elemental has to offer, not just to the characters in Ooh, but to us as we listen to her story. If candy is innocence and fire is passion, then slime is something far more ambiguous. It is a kingdom that shifts and stretches, never quite holding its shape. The slime element is often overlooked in Adventure Time because it doesn't sparkle with beauty like candy, or command with destruction like fire, or chill with loneliness like ice. Instead, it oozes quietly in the background, both playful and unsettling, always hinting at something deeper. In this part of our journey, we explore the world of slime and its ruler, Slime Princess, uncovering how transformation lies at the heart of what makes this element so fascinating. The Slime Kingdom is perhaps the most bizarre of all the elemental kingdoms. Its land is not made of candy or crystals or ice, but of sticky puddles and gelatinous landscapes that seem to bounce and squish beneath your feet. Even the creatures that live there reflect this strangeness. They wobble, stretch, and reform themselves, always in flux, never static. In this way, the slime element mirrors a universal truth. Life is never still. It is always moving, always transforming, even when we do not notice it. Slime Princess herself embodies this idea. At first glance, she may seem like one of the more comedic and less threatening princesses of Ooh. Her voice is playful, her form almost silly, and her presence often inspires laughter more than awe. But behind that humorous exterior lies a very real and very important truth about what the slime element represents. Slime Princess is not bound to rigid structures or traditions. She is free-flowing, adaptive, and unafraid of change. In fact, she thrives on it. Think of the way slime behaves when touched. It doesn't break like ice or burn like fire. It doesn't shatter into pieces or vanish into air. Instead, it molds itself around whatever holds it, stretching and flowing until it settles into a new shape. This quality makes it both resilient and unsettling, for it cannot easily be destroyed or contained. Slime finds its way into cracks and crevices, spreading where you least expect it, quietly taking form again, even when dispersed. In the elemental storyline, when the balance of the world was disrupted and patient St. Pym unleashed the full power of the four elements, the Slime Kingdom revealed its true nature. Entire landscapes were turned into quivering masses of goo, swallowing up forests, towns, and creatures. Slime did not conquer in the way fire did, nor freeze the world like ice. Instead, it absorbed. It transformed everything into itself, folding the diversity of Ooh into one endless puddle of slime. This reveals something profound. The slime element is about more than just silliness or gross humor. It speaks to the inevitability of change and assimilation. Nothing stays the same forever. People, kingdoms, even entire worlds are transformed over time. Some resist, some collapse, but others, like slime, adapt and endure by becoming something new. Slime Princess herself may not always appear as wise or commanding as Princess Bubblegum, but her kingdom's essence teaches a lesson that is just as powerful. To transform is to survive. To reshape is to continue. This lesson is often hidden beneath the surface of her playful demeanor, but if we look closely, we can see it reflected in her choices and her way of ruling. One striking thing about the slime kingdom is that it rarely seems to care about order or perfection. Unlike Bubblegum's rigid structures of science and monarchy, slime doesn't concern itself with hierarchy or rules. It spreads where it pleases, taking on whatever form is available. This lack of rigidity can feel chaotic, but it can also be liberating. After all, rules and order can sometimes trap us in places we don't belong. Slime reminds us that change, even messy change, can lead us somewhere unexpected and necessary. Slime, in its essence, is something that seems both fragile and eternal. It can slip through your fingers, reform again, and never truly vanish. It is this quality of resilience, of constant reassembly, that makes the slime elementals in the slime kingdom such a fascinating piece of Oo's greater story. Unlike fire, which burns brightly and consumes, or ice, which freezes and isolates, slime is a force of renewal. It can fall apart and come back together in new shapes, constantly evolving, constantly shifting. The slime elemental herself, Slime Princess, embodies this quality in a playful yet profound way. At first glance, she may seem simple, or even silly, with her bubbly voice and carefree attitude. But beneath that exterior lies a deep connection to the themes of transformation and impermanence. She does not cling tightly to form or control. Instead, she embraces the idea that change is natural, that falling apart is not an end, but simply a step toward becoming something new. This philosophy is reflected in the very nature of slime itself. If you try to hold slime too tightly, it slips away, but if you let it rest, it holds together with surprising strength. This delicate balance mirrors many of the relationships we see across Adventure Time. Friendships, love, and even identity itself cannot be forced into rigid shapes. They are ever-changing, sometimes dissolving, sometimes reforming, always moving forward. Slime reminds us that identity is not fixed. It is something we shape and reshape with each passing moment. In the lore of Adventure Time, we also see hints that slime carries a kind of forgotten wisdom hidden beneath its seemingly light-hearted surface. When Patience St. Pym, the ice elemental, sought to reawaken the other elementals in her attempt to reshape Oo, it was Slime Princess who represented transformation at its core. This was not just a matter of reawakening power, but of reawakening the essence of adaptability. The world itself, scarred by war and reshaped by magic, needed that lesson. Things could never return to what they once were, but they could reform into something new, even if strange or unexpected. Think also about how slime as an element naturally resists permanence. Where fire leaves ash and ice leaves frozen remains, slime leaves nothing behind that cannot be reabsorbed. It breaks down and rebuilds in a cycle of endless becoming. This mirrors not just the way Oo is rebuilt after every great disaster, but also how its people adapt, learn, and evolve. Finn himself undergoes transformations that echo this idea. From a child adventurer to a more reflective young man, he shifts and reshapes his understanding of himself and his world. Slime is the physical embodiment of that truth. Change is not only unavoidable, it is the very essence of existence. Another fascinating detail is how the Slime Kingdom seems to be a place of both chaos and joy. Slime Princess rules with a kind of playful authority and never as rigid as Princess Bubblegum or as commanding as Flame Princess. Her leadership style reflects the very element she embodies: loose, flexible, open to change. This suggests that transformation is not about control, but about allowing things to grow and shift naturally. In this way, the slime kingdom almost feels like a metaphor for life itself, unpredictable yet resilient, sometimes messy, but always moving toward renewal. There is also an innocence to slime that ties directly to transformation. Children often play with slime, stretching it, molding it, laughing as it slips through their fingers. In this way, slime becomes a reminder that transformation does not always need to be frightening. It can be playful, experimental, and even fun. The transformations in Ooh are not only moments of loss, but also of discovery. Just as slime can shift into countless forms, so too can the characters of Adventure Time discover new sides of themselves through the changes they undergo. Slime's connection to identity becomes even more interesting when we consider how characters in the show sometimes struggle with who they are. Take, for example, Lemongrab, a character defined by rigidity and resistance to change. His inability to adapt makes him suffer, while the slime elemental's very nature is the opposite. She thrives in change. This contrast highlights an important truth. When we resist transformation, we create suffering, but when we embrace it, we open ourselves to growth. In the cosmic balance of Ooh, slime represents the reminder that nothing stays the same forever. It encourages acceptance of that truth, not as a burden, but as a gift. Relationships may shift, kingdoms may rise and fall, identities may stretch and reform. But all of it is part of the natural rhythm of life. Slime is not an enemy of permanence, but a gentle teacher, showing that even when something falls apart, it can always come back together in a new and often unexpected way. So when we look at Slime Princess with her carefree giggles and playful attitude, we might think of her as simply lighthearted. But in truth, she carries one of the deepest and most comforting lessons in all of Adventure Time. That transformation is not the end of who we are, but a continuation. Every time slime slips apart and reforms, it whispers the same message. We are always becoming. We are never fixed, never finished. And that is not a weakness. It is a quiet, resilient kind of strength. Slime Princess may have been presented with comedic undertones, her speech patterns silly, her mannerisms awkward, and her court often filled with eccentric citizens who wobbled about in endless states of half-solid form. But beneath that seemingly simple surface, her kingdom is one of the most thematically rich in the Adventure Time universe. It is a place where identity is not static, but ever-changing, where nothing holds a permanent shape, and where individuality itself is a fluid negotiation. Slime is inherently unstable. It is at once substance and lack of substance. It holds together, but only just. And in that tenuous balance lies the metaphor of transformation. What makes Slime Princess stand out is not that she is the most powerful of the elementals, but rather that she embodies the concept of adaptability. Unlike the strict dominion of ice, which locks everything into cold permanence, or fire, which consumes all that touches it, slime thrives on impermanence. It embraces change without fear. Citizens of her kingdom slide into new forms, splitting apart and rejoining with ease. Their lives are a constant cycle of dissolving and rebuilding, a gentle reflection of the truth that we as humans, too, are always in flux. We shed layers of ourselves, old identities, relationships, dreams, and reshape them into something new. In Adventure Time, this fluid quality is often played for laughs. We see Slime Princess's kingdom bubbling with gooey chaos, where disputes might be settled by dissolving into puddles, or where royalty itself can melt into the crowd. Yet hidden in this light-hearted imagery is something deeply profound. The recognition that transformation is not a failure of stability, but a core feature of life. In fact, it is transformation that allows survival. The Mushroom War devastated the world, but what followed was a long age of adaptation. Mutants, hybrids, magical beings all were, in some sense, slime. They were the products of endless recombination and reshaping. Slime Princess's kingdom is therefore less an oddity and more a reflection of the world's natural state. Everything after the war became fluid. Everything after the war had to transform. When viewed alongside the other elementals, slime represents a counterpoint to rigidity. Ice isolates, fire overwhelms, candy infantilizes, but slime transforms. It does not fix things into one state. It does not demand perfection. Instead, it allows for mistakes, for messiness, for impermanence. And perhaps that is why Slime Princess often seems so carefree. She does not carry the burden of eternal youth like Princess Bubblegum. She does not struggle with destructive rage like Flame Princess. She does not suffer the crushing loneliness of the Ice Kingdom. She simply accepts what she is in the moment, knowing she may be different tomorrow. That acceptance, subtle as it is, can be seen as a kind of wisdom, one that Adventure Time rarely spells out but consistently shows us through imagery and tone. This theme of transformation comes to the forefront in the elemental storyline when the elemental natures of the world are restored. Characters find themselves forced into extreme versions of these archetypes. Fire rages uncontrollably. Ice spreads endlessly. Candy suffocates with its sweetness. And slime, it oozes everywhere, covering and consuming in a way that is neither destructive nor constructive, but dissolving. In this state, slime is not just playful goo, but a symbol of dissolution itself. It shows how transformation can tip into dissolution when taken to an extreme. What begins as adaptability can, if unchecked, become erasure. Identity itself can dissolve, and individuality can vanish into the soup of constant change. There's something unsettling in that imagery. Imagine being so malleable that you lose yourself entirely. Imagine a society where nothing holds long enough to form memory or tradition. In this way, slime also embodies the danger of transformation without anchor. While ice may freeze and fire may burn, slime can cause the quiet terror of losing definition. Who are you when you melt into others? What remains when every shape you hold slips away? These questions give depth to the laughter we often associate with the Slime Princess. Her silliness hides a philosophy of both freedom and risk, of liberation from rigidity, but also vulnerability to meaninglessness. We can also look at how Slime Princess herself navigates this. She is not a character driven by heavy burdens like Simon, or by epic destinies like Finn. Instead, she is self-assured in her own strange way. She takes pride in her gooey form, speaks confidently even when others laugh, and asserts her role as a ruler even though her kingdom constantly reshapes itself beneath her. Her personality embodies the balance between embracing fluidity and still maintaining a sense of self. And this is where she teaches us something vital. Transformation does not have to mean dissolution. You can change, you can adapt, you can even melt and reform while still holding on to an inner core of identity. When children and adults alike watch Adventure Time, they may not consciously reflect on these deeper truths, but the symbolism quietly seeps in. To be slime is to be resilient in a world that does not stay the same. It is to let go of rigid expectations and embrace the flow. Yet it is also to remain mindful of the need for some stability, some boundary that keeps the self intact. This duality makes slime one of the most deceptively profound forces in the Adventure Time mythos. Slime, in its endless adaptability, also reminds us that transformation is rarely a single event. It is instead a series of shifts, sometimes small, sometimes monumental, that shape a person or a kingdom into what it becomes. Consider how Slime Princess herself constantly reinvents her alliances, loyalties, and even her self-image. At times, she presents herself as a carefree ruler who just enjoys the flowing, gooey nature of her kingdom. At other times, she steps into the role of diplomat, cunning negotiator, or even fighter when circumstances demand it. She can be underestimated, even laughed at, but she shows that fluidity of identity is a strength, not a weakness. The Slime Kingdom itself also illustrates this truth. Its borders are not fixed like the stone walls of the Candy Kingdom or the icy towers of the Ice Kingdom. Instead, they expand and contract, shifting with the flow of rivers and bogs, reshaping themselves depending on the season or the surrounding terrain. It is a land that doesn't resist change but embraces it fully. This natural plasticity mirrors the emotional and psychological flexibility we all must cultivate in life. When we resist change, we harden and eventually crack. When we move with it, as slime does, we survive. The transformative energy of slime extends even into relationships. In Adventure Time, bonds between characters are often tested by drastic shifts. Friendships melt into rivalries, rivalries cool into friendships, and loves evolve into something unrecognizable. The slime element represents this cycle of morphing, the fluid dance between connection and separation. Slime teaches that no relationship is static, and that growth comes from accepting the shape-shifting nature of bonds. Slime Princess's flirtations, her temporary loyalties, and her ability to reinvent herself in the social and political landscapes of Ooh all echo this theme. There's also an important symbolic link between slime and the act of healing. While slime may appear messy or even gross, it has a protective quality. Think of the way certain creatures secrete slime to guard wounds or to prevent themselves from drying out. In this sense, slime shields vulnerability. It allows for recovery and renewal. In the lore of Ooh, where battles and heartbreaks leave scars, slime becomes a reminder that healing is rarely clean or immediate. It is sticky, slow, and requires patience. Yet from this gooey process, resilience is born. Transformation, as shown by the slime element, does not always mean leaving the past behind. Instead, it means absorbing it, carrying traces of it forward, much like how slime clings to everything it touches. Slime Princess embodies this with her quirky yet oddly wise rule. She doesn't pretend to be something she isn't. She accepts her sticky, unpredictable nature and rules accordingly. This authenticity, paired with adaptability, makes her kingdom a subtle but enduring power in the land of Ooh. The elemental balance within the world cannot be complete without slime. Fire burns hot and fast. Ice freezes and isolates. Candy preserves innocence. But slime ensures that everything can be remade, reshaped, and healed. It ties the other elements together, making sure that destruction is never final, and that stagnation is never permanent. Without slime, Ooh would be locked in rigid extremes, unable to bend with the inevitable tides of time. And so, as we close this chapter on slime and transformation, we are left with a deeper understanding of what it means to flow. The lesson is not about force or permanence, but about endurance through adaptability, Life, like slime, is messy, fluid, and ever-changing. The beauty of it lies in the willingness to accept new forms, to shed the old, and to welcome the unexpected. To transform is not to lose oneself, but to find new expressions of the same core essence. Slime is not glamorous, it is not sharp or radiant. It does not shine like fire or glisten like ice, but it holds the secret of survival. In the quiet, sticky persistence of slime, there is an eternal wisdom. Things may fall apart, identities may dissolve, kingdoms may crumble, but something new will always take shape from the remnants. Slime ensures that life is never truly gone, only remade. And in that endless cycle of transformation, we find the hope that no ending is ever final, and every change carries the seed of beginning. When we look across the vastness of Ooh, one pattern repeats itself again and again. No matter how much chaos sweeps across the land, no matter how much destruction or darkness rises to the surface, something always comes forward to restore balance. This is not balance in the sense of peace or perfection, but balance as an eternal rhythm, a push and pull between forces that refuse to let either side dominate for too long. In many ways, Adventure Time is a story of that rhythm. The never-ending dance between order and chaos, creation and decay, innocence and corruption. The concept of balance shows up most clearly in the elemental forces that make up the very fabric of Ooh, ice, fire, slime, and candy. Each represents not only a magical element, but also a philosophical idea. Ice is about isolation and memory, fire about passion and destruction, slime about change and survival, and candy about sweetness and innocence. Together they form a cycle, and when one grows too powerful, the others shift to correct it. This is not something anyone in Ooh truly controls, not even the most powerful wizards or rulers. Instead, it is something woven into the laws of existence itself. But balance in Ooh goes beyond just the elements. We see it in the lives of its characters, especially in Finn and Jake, who are often at the heart of this delicate interplay. Finn, the human boy who represents courage and hope, constantly struggles with forces that are larger than him: war, evil, cosmic entities, and the weight of his own destiny. And yet every time Finn faces despair, something brings him back, recenters him, and pushes him to continue. Jake, with his laid-back attitude and wisdom hidden beneath jokes, often serves as Finn's counterweight. Where Finn is fiery and eager to fight, Jake is calm and reluctant. Together they embody balance on a personal scale, showing us how two different natures can complement each other to form something stronger. If we think back to Simon Petrikov and the Ice King, we see balance again, though in a much sadder form. Simon's story is about how love and kindness were overtaken by madness and cold isolation. Yet even in his most unrecognizable state, as the Ice King rambling nonsense and chasing after princesses, small flashes of Simon remained. His friendship with Marceline, his hidden desire for companionship, and even his bizarre attempts at romance show a heart that never fully disappeared. In that way, Simon's life was balanced between tragedy and resilience. He did not fully lose himself, and he was eventually given the chance to return. That outcome itself is part of the eternal balance, the idea that nothing is ever entirely lost, that even when darkness takes over, light can reemerge. The balance also shows in the great battles with cosmic entities. The Lich, for instance, represents pure death, the end of all things. His presence in Ooh always threatens to tip everything into despair, and yet every time he rises, something equally strong stands against him. Whether it is Finn's stubborn bravery, the combined strength of Ooh's heroes, or the sheer randomness of fate, the Lich never wins. His defeats do not erase him. He always lingers, waiting, but they prevent him from ever being the final word. That balance reminds us that even the most unstoppable forces are checked by something, whether it's willpower, love, or even chaos itself. Then there is GOLB, the incomprehensible entity beyond good or evil, who embodies chaos and entropy. GOLB's presence is so overwhelming that it seems impossible to resist, and yet Oo does resist, not by overpowering him, but by finding a counterweight. In this case, it was music, harmony, and the bond between father and daughter. Betty's sacrifice, while heartbreaking, showed how love could hold its own even against the most unfathomable void. That moment perfectly illustrates the eternal balance. Chaos and destruction are answered, not with equal force, but with something entirely different, something softer, yet no less powerful. When we pay attention to these stories, we realize that balance in Oo is not static. It shifts like the tides. Sometimes destruction has the upper hand, and sometimes innocence flourishes. Sometimes love heals, and sometimes grief lingers. What makes Oo so compelling is that this balance does not feel manufactured or forced. It feels alive, as if the land itself breathes with these rhythms. And within that rhythm, every character, from the smallest candy citizen to the mightiest cosmic being, plays a part in maintaining the eternal balance. If we look closely, we can see that balance is not just a background theme in Oo, but a living structure. It is not about choosing good over evil or light over darkness, but about finding the delicate space where both can exist without destroying the other. In many ways, the entire history of Oo can be read as a cycle of imbalance and restoration. The Great Mushroom War tore the scales apart, unleashing horrors, yet from that destruction came new life, new magic, and new forms of community. Every time a great power rises to tilt things too far in one direction, another force seems to grow in response. This is not a neat or orderly process. It is often painful, chaotic, and destructive. But somehow, over time, equilibrium is always reached again. Characters themselves embody this idea. Take Princess Bubblegum. She represents logic, science, control, and order. Yet her reign is far from perfect, because her attempts to control everything can become stifling and even cruel. Opposite her, characters like the Slime Princess or the chaotic citizens of other kingdoms live with messiness, randomness, and a lack of structure. Neither way of living is portrayed as absolutely right or wrong. The lesson lies in how these opposing forces interact. When they clash, they create tension and suffering. But when they coexist, they reveal a harmony where each side prevents the other from spiraling out of control. We see this even more clearly in the cosmic beings. Prismo, the Wishmaster, exists in a realm outside of linear time, offering people exactly what they desire, but never without consequences. His role is not to grant happiness, but to remind us that every wish carries weight. Every gain requires a loss. GOLB, on the other hand, embodies entropy itself, a void that consumes and collapses creation. It is terrifying, yet essential. Without destruction, the universe would stagnate. Without chaos, order would suffocate. It is the eternal dance, the push and pull, that ensures the story never ends. The characters who survive are the ones who learn to adapt, to flow with this balance rather than resist it. What is fascinating is how deeply personal this balance becomes in the lives of the heroes. Finn, for example, begins as a boy who believes in absolute good and absolute evil. His sword is meant to defeat monsters and save the day, but as he grows, he realizes that things are not so simple. The enemies he faces often have tragic backstories. The villains are not pure darkness. but being shaped by pain, mistakes, or corruption. Finn learns to hold both truths at once, that you can fight against harm while also understanding the suffering of the one who causes it. This emotional maturity is not just his journey, but the very reflection of U's philosophy. True strength lies not in tipping the scales, but in carrying their weight with compassion. The eternal balance also shows itself in cycles of inheritance. We see this in the ice crown, a symbol of immense power tied to madness and sorrow. Simon, once a gentle scholar, is consumed by it. Yet his sacrifice protects Marceline. His tragedy teaches Finn lessons about responsibility and consequence. Later, when Gunther inherits the crown, the same power manifests again in new, unexpected ways. The balance is never fixed. It shifts, evolves, and repeats across generations. The crown does not vanish, nor does its danger ever fully resolve. Instead, the world adjusts, absorbing its presence into the rhythm of things. This cycle reminds us that balance is not about erasing problems, but learning to live with them, understanding that nothing is permanent, and nothing is absolute. When we look at the kingdoms themselves, each one represents a different piece of this eternal puzzle. The Candy Kingdom embodies stability and community, yet risks rigidity and dependence. The Fire Kingdom burns with passion and fury, but its flames can just as easily destroy as they can warm. The Slime Kingdom flows and transforms endlessly, reminding us of adaptability. Though without direction, it can lose itself in endless change. Together, these kingdoms form a larger picture, like colors on a palette. Alone, they may seem incomplete or extreme, but together they create the vivid world of U, a place that thrives on diversity of essence. Each kingdom pulls the others back toward balance, even in conflict. Another powerful symbol of balance is magic itself. Magic in U is not portrayed as inherently good or evil. It is a force, raw and unpredictable, capable of both wonder and devastation. Peppermint Butler, with his deep knowledge of the dark arts, embodies this duality. He is both servant and schemer, protector and threat. His relationship with magic is not about purity, but about management, about keeping dangerous forces in check while still drawing from their strength. This mirrors how the characters themselves live. They do not destroy their darker sides, but learn to carry them, to temper their flaws with kindness, and to keep walking forward even while imperfect. What is so beautiful is how Adventure Time shows balance not as an endpoint, but as a process. Balance is not a single state to achieve, but a constant act of motion, like keeping one's footing on a moving ship. The characters fall, stumble, and sometimes sink into despair. Yet they rise again, finding a new equilibrium, one that feels earned and honest. In this way, the story becomes not just about adventure, but about resilience, about holding steady in the ever-shifting tides of existence. The balance of the elements in U was never meant to remain static. Like the turning of the seasons or the phases of the moon, each element carried with it a rhythm, a pulse that could never truly stay still. The candy element promised sweetness and joy, yet too much of it suffocated life under layers of syrupy comfort. Ice offered stillness and preservation, but if unchecked, it locked all of existence into lifeless stasis. Slime embodied constant change, but too much of it eroded meaning itself, melting identity until nothing had form. Fire brought energy and passion, yet when it spread without restraint, it devoured everything in its path. These contradictions are what kept U in a strange, fragile harmony. The world was not meant to belong to one element alone, but rather to the tension between them. The beauty of U lay in this dance, the way one element's excess was softened by the presence of another. Candy softened fire's destruction. Fire thawed ice's stillness. Ice cooled slime's endless mutability, and slime broke down Candy's rigid walls. It was an endless cycle of resistance and cooperation, of giving way and holding fast. When Evergreen crafted the crown, he may not have realized that he was interrupting this natural rhythm. By forcing the power of ice into a singular form, he preserved a piece of the balance but froze it into something rigid, unnatural. And later, when Patience St. Pym sought to unleash the other elementals, she too disrupted the balance, attempting to elevate one over the others. The truth is, the elements could never be separated from one another without warping the nature of reality itself. They existed as a family of forces, and like siblings, they bickered, clashed, and reconciled. We see this balance reflected in the lives of those touched by the elements. Take Princess Bubblegum, for example. She was candy to her very core, yet within her was also the cold logic of ice, the adaptability of slime, and the fiery passion of creation. In some ways, she carried all four forces within her, though Candy remained dominant. When she became too rigid, Finn and Jake's adventures often nudged her toward flexibility. When she became too detached, Marceline's fiery emotions reminded her of the warmth she sometimes lacked. Even within individuals, the balance whispered, reminding them that they were never just one thing. And perhaps this is what makes Finn such a pivotal figure in U. Though not an elemental in the traditional sense, he often stood at the crossroads of these powers. He befriended Flame Princess and tempered her destructive passion with his compassion. He protected Ice King even when the rest of the world dismissed him, offering the warmth of human connection to someone trapped in the cold. He stood by Princess Bubblegum as she ruled, sometimes challenging her rigidity when it grew too stifling. And even with Slime Princess and the strange fluidity she represented, Finn embraced her eccentricity with patience and humor. In this way, Finn became a living bridge between the elements, embodying balance not through magic, but through humanity. The more we examine U, the more we see that the elements were not meant to dominate, but to coexist. The great mistake of the elementals and of those who sought to harness their power was believing that one force could rule without consequence. The Candy Kingdom, as idyllic as it seemed, could collapse into suffocation. The Ice Kingdom, while protective in its chill, could isolate and erase life's vitality. Fire Kingdom burned brightly, yet its beauty came with destruction. And the Slime Kingdom shifted endlessly, too unstable to hold on to lasting meaning. None could stand alone, yet together they shaped a world both fragile and resilient. This eternal balance was more than just a theme of survival. It was a lesson echoing through the land and through the lives of its people. U thrived because the elements never truly won or lost. Their push and pull gave the world rhythm, a pulse that carried life forward. Too much of one would spell disaster, but together, even in their clashes, they created harmony. And so when GOLB entered the story, threatening to unravel existence itself, what truly stood against him was not just magic or strength, but the balance of these forces. For even chaos has no meaning without order, and destruction has no weight without creation. The elements, in their eternal rivalry and cooperation, stood as proof that life was not meant to be one thing forever. It was meant to change, to grow, to find equilibrium in the face of extremes. This balance carried a deeper truth, that U itself was a living story of contrasts. Sweetness and sorrow, silence and laughter, destruction and renewal. To exist in Oo was to walk between these forces, never falling fully into one, but instead learning how they shaped one another, and in that balance, the world found its magic. As we near the end of our journey tonight, let us step back and reflect on the delicate balance that holds Oo together. The elements may seem playful, frightening, or overwhelming, yet each one reveals something true about existence. Fire shows us the beauty of passion, but also the danger of unchecked anger. Ice reminds us of the stillness of solitude, but also the pain of isolation. Candy teaches joy and comfort, though it can slip into complacency. Slime shows the necessity of change, but also the discomfort of losing form. When Princess Bubblegum saw this balance disrupted, she realized that no single element could rule alone. The four of them needed one another. Without fire, the world would lack spark. Without ice, the world would lose its quiet reflections. Without candy, there would be no sweetness to soften life's hardships. And without slime, the world would be stagnant, unable to grow or transform. The struggle of the elementals is not unlike the inner struggles that each of us faces. Within every heart lies a spark of fire, a shard of ice, a dash of sweetness, and the flowing adaptability of slime. Some nights, fire burns hotter within us, pushing us to act or create. Other nights, ice takes hold, and we feel still, distant, or withdrawn. Sometimes we lean into candy, enjoying small pleasures and seeking comfort. At other times, slime guides us to shed old layers and become something new. This, perhaps, is what makes the world of Oo so relatable. Though it is a land of magic, monsters, and impossible adventures, it mirrors truths we know in our own quiet lives. Balance is never permanent. It shifts, changes, and must be maintained again and again. It is not a destination, but a living rhythm. And what of the heroes who protect this rhythm? Finn and Jake, though not born of the elements, became bridges between them. They were the ones who stood in the middle, who reminded the elementals of their place in the greater picture. Finn's humanity and Jake's boundless adaptability allowed them to move between fire, ice, candy, and slime without fully belonging to any of them. Their presence was proof that balance is not about perfect quality, but about harmony. It is about knowing when to cool the flames, when to melt the ice, when to savor the sweetness, and when to embrace the flow of change. There is something deeply soothing in that idea, that no matter how chaotic or fractured the world may seem, there is always the possibility of balance returning. Even when Fire King fights to consume, even when Ice Queen covers all in snow, even when Candy Queen tries to smother with cheer, and even when Slime Princess overwhelms with endless change, balance waits quietly, ready to be found again. Perhaps that is the message the elementals have for us as we drift into sleep tonight. That in every storm of passion, in every winter of silence, in every sweet moment of joy, and in every confusing tide of transformation, balance lives within us. It may wobble, it may falter, but it can always be restored. So as you close your eyes and allow your breathing to settle, imagine the world of Oo glowing faintly in the night. Fire flickers softly, ice glimmers with cool blue light, candy hums with a gentle laughter, and slime ripples with playful movement. Together they do not fight. Together they form a circle, a pattern, an eternal balance that hums like a lullaby. And with that vision, I will leave you to your dreams. May you find balance in your own heart tonight. May you carry the warmth of fire, the peace of ice, the joy of candy, and the flow of slime into the quiet of your rest. Good night, and sleep well.